Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Face your fears. Hey everybody, Joe Simons, like diamond, back again with Salt Strong Unchurched. Wow. It is a wild time to be living in this world. It is a time of uncertainty. There is certainly a lot of fear. It never helps that you have a presidential election with, it seems like, two sides that just want to do nothing but sling mud, create animosity, which stirs up even more fear and anxiety, etc. And it's sad. It's a shame. Same point as I talked about on last week's podcast. This is all part of God's plan. He doesn't make mistakes, and he knows what the future holds. I think, or actually, I know we as humans get a lot of anxiety because we don't know, and we want to know, right? We all want to know, hey, what does tomorrow hold? When is this going to happen? When is that going to happen? When am I going to heal? When's this going to happen? When's this going to happen with my kids? We all want to know when things are going to get fixed. We all want to know when things are going to improve. And this whole podcast is about fast tracking that by facing your fear or the fears. And that anxiety, is someone who lived with daily anxiety for over a decade. I know firsthand, I know what I was running from, and, it's different for everyone. But looking back, the biggest problem that just kept compounding, and at some point just cascading my life and even how I thought, my mindset and everything, was all because I didn't face my fear. And just like anything, when you're supposed to do something, right? You're supposed to have that tough conversation with someone, or you're supposed to have that tough conversation with a girlfriend or boyfriend you're dating, or maybe a fiance, maybe you're married and you're supposed to have that conversation, or a conversation with your kids or a coworker or something, and you put it off. And maybe you have to fire someone. We had to let someone go who recently was really, really painful, a close friend. And I absolutely hate those. And my gut that morning wanted to put it off, right? Because it was a fearful thing. It was causing me anxiety, and I wanted to put off, I'll put it off one more day. And the longer you do that would have been me not facing my fear of having to do it. Afterwards, I felt better. I still never feel good about that kind of stuff, but in every tough conversation I've had, and I'm sure you can relate with this, like everything that you knew you needed to do, when you finally did it, even if it felt almost impossible, it could be public speaking. It's something that you had to do, right? It could be getting in front of your church or your kid's classroom or something and having to speak. And that causes a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. It's a fear, right? It's a flat out fear. But once you face it right afterwards, how much better you feel. And here's a little trick that I started doing, and I want to share it with you. I know that feeling of how good it feels after you face the fear, even when you screw up, right? I remember when I first started doing public speaking stuff, I bombed a couple of them, but it still felt good just getting it off my chest. It felt good that it was over, right? That I'd faced my fear, even though I was like, man, I said some dumb stuff, or I was sweating up there. And even going back to my first couple of times I had to speak at like weddings and stuff, some of my college buddies' weddings, like I was a hot mess. Didn't even make sense on one in particular, but man, it just felt so good. There was this just relief afterwards. And so I just started bottling up that feeling. And so before I would have to speak, for instance, I spoke at a church group here with a bunch of kids. It was like 80, youth, like high school kids, were all looking up to me. Because I'd written this book on fishing for happiness. The pastor read the book and really wanted me to share some of those things with their big youth group. And I'll be honest, I was nervous, to the point I was starting to get myself worked up and get anxiety. It was fearful. I hadn't really done that. And especially I don't mind it so much of my peers or my, people on my team, or even like at a Salt Strong chapter meeting. That stuff doesn't really bother me as much anymore. But speaking in front of 80 high school kids who were all just looking and probably would rather be on their phones and stuff. I don't know. I just started getting anxiety. And what I did to kind of flip that on its head was I just started going back to that feeling and basically putting myself like right at knowing where I was going to be right afterwards, or if I was going to be in my car going home, if I couldn't actually visualize the settings, I couldn't. I hadn't been in the place I was going to be speaking, but I knew at some point I was going to have to get in my car after I spoke, and I would put myself, I'd close my eyes and actually put myself in my vehicle, in my exact vehicle, where my hands would be on the steering wheel, just everything, and visualize like that good feeling, like, oh man, this is off my chest. It feels so good. And I would just start conditioning myself to start believing that versus getting caught up in all the fear. Man, what happens if these kids are all just staring down at their phones and no one's paying attention? Am I going to have to interrupt them? Like you start going down this path of what if? Who cares what if? Focus on the after the feeling and the after feeling effect. And you know what? The what ifs, it drove me mad. Like in terms of, I'm not saying mad as in angry. It drove me in like a madman, like with all the anxiety I put upon myself, thinking about all the what ifs. Most of them never happened. A few did. And even then, it wasn't that bad looking back, knowing what I know now. So with facing your fears, don't make excuses for it, right? I started making excuses about having to lay this person off. Right? I was trying to make every excuse possible. And I finally said, nope, Joe, stop it. We're facing your fear. This is what we said we're going to do. Here's the reasons why. I already had peace with it. I prayed on it. I knew it was the right thing to do. It was just fearful because it was going to be very, very uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable firing someone if you've never had to do it. It's not fun, especially a friend and someone you truly care about. It's not fun. In many cases, it stinks. I've shed tears on most of them. It's absolutely something there's not many things I say I hate, but I hate doing it. Absolutely hate doing, because it's a fear. So I can't make excuses for it. I can't enable it. I can't empower that fear, right? I just have to stop it and do it. And I started, once again, putting myself in a position. I knew where I was going to be. I was going to be at my desk. I can visualize myself at my desk. I put myself at my desk. That was the advantage of being in the spot. I knew it was this firing was going to take place, and I just started visualizing, all right, God, here's how good it's going to feel. Here's the burden essentially off my shoulders after it's done. And I'm telling you, it helps so much. And it takes a little practice, just like anything, just like the slow breathing through anxiety and all that takes a little bit of practice. But once you start doing it, you realize that you can, because it's all about mindset, you can condition your mind and recondition your mind and even trick your mind into believing that it's a good thing and not just a bad thing. And once again, this could be a tough conversation. It could be something that's just been bothering you about your spouse, like my wife leaving dishes in the sink, and I'm always the guy cleaning up everyone's dishes every single night. And I finally put my foot down recently, and I was like, guys, why is it always me? Like, oh, we just thought you liked doing it. I was like, why would I want to clean up all your dishes? If the dishwasher's open, put your stuff in the dishwasher. And I did it with a little bit more love and humility, but it was an uncomfortable conversation, especially with my wife, because she does do so much, and I just kept putting it off, but it felt good. And she's like, oh, I didn't know you felt that way. I can just as easily put it in there. I just thought it was just something that was routine I was in. And that was a very simple one. But anything that's bothering you, I found that by facing your fears head on, not making excuses, not enabling it, not empowering it, just facing them, it's the only way to grow, right? If I look back at all of my biggest growth moments as a person, as a business person, as a husband, as a father, right? There's uncomfortable things that you have to talk about with your kids, especially start becoming teenagers and doing dumber things and more expensive things and breaking more expensive things. You have to, and sometimes getting other parents or other people involved, like those are all uncomfortable conversations, but every one of them is a growth opportunity. It's a growth moment. And I do believe, because there are some, right, that you wonder, man, God, why did this happen to me? Why am I even in this position? Why am I even having to face this fear? And many times it's because God's saying, this is how I'm growing you. Son, daughter, this is how I'm getting you to that next level. And looking back, those growth moments when I essentially went to another level, and whatever you want to pick, it's usually because of something very uncomfortable. It was something or some experience or some conversation where I had to face my fear and just bust through that wall, if you will. And so I pray over every one of these episodes that this just reaches the right people. And I know this is probably reaching multiple people because I hear from so many people that are struggling with this. And especially the anxiety part. I've got that video out there with over 500,000 views. I get an email. It feels like every day. Maybe it's every other day, but it's many per week that I get. And the one common theme is something along the lines of not facing their fear, that there's some sort of fear that's triggering this anxiety and they're not facing it. They're either enabling it, they're empowering it sometimes, not on purpose, but just through mindset. And many times making excuses for it. And I think even people around them making excuses for it. And I know that's tough. It was incredibly tough for me. It just like letting someone go or public speaking, any of that stuff. All of these are very, very tough, and some way tougher for others. Some people it's easy, but man, they have a trouble doing this, just having a normal conversation with, Bob in accounting, whereas, Sue in accounting is like, man, this is the easiest conversation, but she couldn't get in front of an audience of 4 people without passing out. Everyone's wired a little bit differently. Everyone's got different fears, but the one thing we have in common is facing our fears. Remember we talked about fear not is, do you remember how many times in the Bible? 365. God literally put fear not, that phrase, those 2 words, fear not, in the Bible 1 time per day. That's very, very odd, right? That it just happened to be 365 times. Go look it up. Isn't that wild? Fear not. So remember that. Fear not when you have that fear building up inside of you, when you have that anxiety, that tension, and that panic coming up inside of you. If you have even just that feeling that, I just want to put this off. I want to make an excuse for it. I'll put it off until tomorrow, the next day. All that does, and I'm laughing because I just went through this myself, and I had to, you know what? Most of these episodes are for me, not you. Like I'm literally just having to do these so I can listen to myself to remind myself all the mistakes I'm making in life. But every time I put that stuff off, it compounds, it gets worse, and it causes more anxiety. Right? The longer I would have put that off, the more awkward it would have been, the more I would have talked myself out of it 10 different ways till Sunday, the more I would have been just a hot mess instead of just ripping the Band-Aid off, facing the fear head on when you know it's something you need to do and just doing it. Like Nike says, just do it. So I hope this was helpful. I know this can impact everyone because everyone has some sort of fear or something they're putting off. Right? The fear of a conversation or a tough conversation or something going on or something you would admit to, whatever it is, right? There's always something that is holding us back from becoming the person that God wants us to be. And the only way to get there is facing your fears, is busting through that wall. So just do it. Fear not. Love you guys. I will talk to you in the next episode. If this was helpful, if you have any questions or just prayer requests on jumping through the fire, if you will, and facing the fear, hit me up. I'd love to hear from you. Joe@saltstrong.com. Otherwise, I will talk to you on the next Unchurched episode.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul.